The overlooked species. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, there were many powerful civilizations. From the towering ancient species that controlled entire star systems to the highly advanced robots that could rebuild entire planets with a single thought, the universe had seen countless races. They all agreed on one thing: humanity, a young species from a small, relatively insignificant planet called Earth, was not worth their attention. Humans had always been seen as a curiosity at best and a nuisance at worst. Their homeworld, Earth, was a planet of chaos and danger. Its surface was covered with oceans, forests, and deserts, all teeming with life. But that life was fragile. Wars, disease, and natural disasters had ravaged humanity for centuries. They'd barely survived, and many in the galaxy saw them as no different from the countless species that had come and gone before them. The Galactic Council, a group of powerful beings who ruled over the galaxy's known races, had decided long ago that humans were not a threat. In fact, they barely considered them worth anything more than a passing glance. Humans were too busy fighting among themselves and struggling to survive to pose any real challenge to the vast empires that existed across the stars. They were little more than space-faring apes, nothing more than space fodder. And so, the Council ignored humanity. They allowed Earth to live in relative obscurity, far removed from the attention of the more powerful races. But this complacency would soon change. On Earth, things were far different than in the grand halls of the Galactic Council. Humans were driven by something the other species in the galaxy didn't fully understand: an unyielding spirit, a drive to survive against all odds. While their technology was primitive compared to the great civilizations of the universe, they had something far more dangerous: a burning desire to prove themselves. The humans had spent centuries building up their defenses, learning to harness the resources of their planet, and expanding their reach into space. Their early space missions were crude, filled with mistakes, but they had learned. Slowly, the humans grew bolder, exploring their own solar system and making their way to neighboring stars. They built ships capable of traveling vast distances, and soon, they were no longer confined to Earth. Still, the galaxy watched from a distance, unimpressed. They saw humans as a species that had no place in the greater order of the universe. Even the so-called outcast aliens, races considered beneath the galaxy's standards, looked down on humanity. These were the creatures that had been cast aside by the Galactic Council, the ones who couldn't keep up with the technological and societal advancements of the more powerful races. Yet, something was beginning to stir within humanity. The humans, who were often underestimated and dismissed, began to realize that they had the potential for something more. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And they weren't content with simply being left alone in the galaxy. A small group of humans, pioneers in their own right, had already begun to defy expectations. They had discovered an ancient, forbidden technology on their home planet, hidden deep in the Earth's core. This technology, far beyond anything humanity had ever created, could be the key to unlocking humanity's true potential. It was a secret that could change everything. The discovery was not without its risks. To most of the galaxy, the idea of humans stumbling upon such a power was laughable. The galaxy had watched them struggle for centuries, expecting them to falter at every turn. But the humans, determined and relentless, began to piece together the secrets of the ancient technology. Unbeknownst to the Council, the humans were growing more capable, more advanced, and more dangerous. The artifact they had uncovered wasn't just any relic. It was a weapon, a tool that could shatter the very laws the galaxy held so dear. The law that dictated no one could ever challenge the established order. The law that said the powerful ruled, and the weak should stay in their place. The universe, and all its civilizations, had grown comfortable in their belief that nothing would ever change. They believed the rules were set in stone. But deep inside the heart of humanity, something stirred, something that would soon prove them wrong. The first sign that things were changing came not from the Council or the outcast aliens, but from a human ship. A simple freighter, barely capable of interstellar travel, was about to break into the forbidden zones of space, the regions that the Galactic Council had strictly controlled. No species dared enter these areas, not even the most powerful of the galactic empires. The freighter's captain, a human who had once been a mere mechanic, had found a way. He wasn't the brightest, nor the most powerful, but he understood something the other species didn't. He understood that humanity's greatest strength lay in its willingness to take risks, to push the boundaries, and to defy the impossible. And as the ship entered the restricted zone, a silent message was sent across the stars, one that would echo in the halls of the Galactic Council. Humanity was ready, ready to challenge the greatest law of the universe. The universe had underestimated them, but they would soon learn that humanity was not just surviving. Humanity was about to change the galaxy forever. The Forbidden Zone. The universe was vast. Across the many star systems, planets, and galaxies, laws and rules governed every action. The Galactic Council, a body composed of representatives from the most advanced species, enforced these laws with strict discipline. It was their job to ensure peace, maintain order, and above all, ensure that no species ever grew too powerful, too rebellious. For centuries, this system had worked. The Council believed in the balance of power. Those who were strong ruled, and those who were weak stayed in their place. But as far as they were concerned, humanity, a species that had only just started venturing into the stars, was far from a threat. They were still considered primitive. Their spacefaring ships were no match for the advanced warships of the galactic empires. They lacked the technology, the understanding of the universe, and the resources to challenge the established order. That was the belief, but it was about to be shattered. Back on Earth, the discovery of the ancient technology had ignited a fire in humanity, a fire that had been dormant for far too long. For centuries, humans had been told that they were insignificant, that they were nothing but space monkeys, and yet they had fought, struggled, and survived. They had proven time and time again that no matter the odds, they could endure. But now, humanity had discovered something more. They had uncovered a weapon, a force that could change the course of history. This wasn't just technology, it was power. The kind of power that the Council had long sought to control, but never understood. The freighter captain, whose name was Alexander Thorne, was the first to see the potential. Alexander had been a mechanic on Earth, fixing old ships and working on interstellar engines. He was no military genius, no politician, and certainly not someone the galaxy would have ever noticed. But there was something different about him. He was resourceful, and more importantly, he had a fierce belief in humanity's potential. He didn't see humans as space fodder. He saw them as something greater. When he discovered the hidden artifact buried deep within the Earth's core, it wasn't just a relic. It was a key to unlocking a power that could rival even the greatest galactic empires. He understood that what they had found could change everything, but he also knew it came with consequences. The galaxy would not sit idly by. The Council would surely come after them. But for Alexander, that didn't matter. What mattered was that humanity had a chance to rise. He called together a small team of trusted individuals, people who shared his belief that humanity could defy the odds. Together, they repaired the ancient freighter, and with a mix of stolen technologies and their own ingenuity, they set course for the Forbidden Zone. The Forbidden Zone was a region of space that no one dared to enter. The Council had placed strict limitations on it, not because they feared any known threat, but because it was a place of unknown potential. It was a place where the laws of the universe were unstable, where the very fabric of reality seemed to bend and twist. It was a place where even the most advanced civilizations had failed to enter and return. But Alexander was different. He wasn't bound by the laws of the Council. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The whispers of humanity's potential, of what they could become, had reached him, and he knew that this was their moment. As the freighter approached the edge of the Forbidden Zone, The crew felt the tension in the air. The ship's systems hummed with life, but there was a quiet dread in the pit of their stomachs. The universe was watching them. They were about to make history, or they were about to meet their end. But they didn't hesitate. They were human, and humans didn't hesitate. They charged forward. The moment the freighter crossed the boundary of the forbidden zone, the universe seemed to react. A ripple of energy surged through space, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble. The ship's sensors went haywire, and for a moment, it felt as if they were falling into an endless void. But the crew, led by Alexander, held their ground. They had no choice. They were in too deep to turn back now. Suddenly, a voice boomed through their communication systems, a voice that was cold and powerful, unlike any they had heard before. "This is a restricted zone. Return to your designated space, or you will be destroyed." The voice came from no one in particular, but the crew could feel its presence in every corner of the ship. It was an authority they had never encountered, and it made them realize just how far they had pushed the boundaries. The Council had made it clear that this zone was off-limits, and they didn't take kindly to trespassers. But Alexander Thorne wasn't afraid. He stepped forward and spoke into the comms. "We are humanity, and we will not be silenced." There was a long pause. The crew waited, holding their breath. Would they be destroyed, or would they make it through this test? The universe was watching, and for the first time, humanity had the chance to show that they were not the weak, helpless species the galaxy had always believed them to be. They were ready to break the rules. But what would be the cost? The galactic response. As the freighter drifted deeper into the forbidden zone, the stars around them flickered and twisted in unnatural ways. The ship's sensors, once reliable, now read nothing but chaos, flashes of light, ripples in space-time, and strange bursts of energy. The crew tried to remain calm, but they couldn't help but feel that they were being watched, that the universe itself was taking note of their defiance. The voice from earlier, cold and commanding, returned to their comms. "You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. You will be held accountable for this breach." The crew exchanged worried glances. Alexander Thorne, however, remained resolute, his eyes locked on the view screen as the galaxies spun before them. They were in too deep to turn back now. "We didn't come this far to turn around," he muttered under his breath. "We're going to see this through." But as they continued their journey, something even more alarming occurred. A massive shadow appeared on the edge of their view, a silhouette unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was a ship, an enormous ship, far larger than any human-made vessel, and it moved toward them with terrifying speed. The crew's tension spiked as they realized they weren't alone anymore. This ship had been waiting for them. "I don't like the look of that," one of the crew members said, his voice trembling. "Stay calm," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "We've got this. They're just trying to intimidate us." But the approaching ship wasn't just a form of intimidation. It was a statement. This was the first sign that the galaxy was reacting to humanity's actions. The Council had dispatched its enforcers, the greatest military force in the known universe, to handle this breach of their sacred laws. A transmission crackled through the comms, filled with static before clearing. The face of an alien officer appeared on the screen, his appearance something far beyond human understanding. Tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through everything. "You are trespassing in the most sacred of territories," the officer's voice boomed, cold and stern. "Return to your station immediately, or we will be forced to take action." The crew held their breath. The officer's presence was overwhelming. But Alexander knew better than to back down now. The humanity he carried in his chest, the belief that they could defy the odds, drove him forward. "We're not turning back," Alexander said firmly. "We've already come too far." A long silence followed. The alien officer's eyes narrowed. "You misunderstand the consequences of your actions," he said slowly, almost with pity. "The rules of the universe exist for a reason. You will not survive this defiance. As if on cue, a series of blinding lights flashed on the view screen, followed by the sound of the ship's engines roaring to life. The massive warship had opened fire. The energy beams shot across space, heading directly for the freighter. But the crew didn't panic. The ship was built for this, made with salvage technology, powerful enough to survive a few hits, and Alexander had been expecting this. He had a plan. "Hold on," Alexander shouted, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Brace for impact." The first wave of energy hit the freighter, rocking the crew members in their seats. The hull groaned under the force, and sparks flew from the control panels. But the freighter held its ground. Another shot came, then another, each blast landing on the ship. But each time, the freighter remained in motion. It was a tough, resilient ship, and it wouldn't be easily destroyed. "We're not going down that easily," Alexander muttered, tightening his grip on the control lever. "Incoming! More ships!" one of the crew shouted, his voice panicked. Suddenly, the view screen was filled with the silhouettes of more ships, these ones even larger and more powerful than the first. They were closing in fast, intent on surrounding the freighter. "We can't fight them all," another crew member said, his voice shaking with fear. But Alexander refused to give in. "We don't need to fight. We just need to survive long enough to reach the core of this forbidden zone." The crew held their breath. They were trapped between the massive alien warships and the mysterious, unstable region of space that lay ahead. If they stayed, they would be obliterated. But if they ran, they risked being hunted down across the stars. "Prepare the engines for maximum speed," Alexander ordered. "We're jumping into the storm. If we're going down, we'll go down fighting." As the crew scrambled to power the engines, the warships loomed closer, and the galaxy seemed to grow colder or darker. The universe had always been a place of laws and order, but now humanity had shattered that order. They had defied the most sacred rule of the stars, and the consequences were closing in fast. But Alexander Thorne wasn't afraid. His team wasn't afraid. They had already made their choice, and they weren't going to let the universe dictate their future. With a final, explosive surge of energy, the freighter shot forward, diving deeper into the forbidden zone, the galaxy's enforcers hot on their trail. It was now or never. Would they make it out alive, or would this be the final chapter for humanity? Into the forbidden zone. The freighter's engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward, slicing through the vacuum of space. The crew gripped their seats, their eyes glued to the view screen as the massive alien warships pursued them relentlessly. The universe was a dangerous place, but now, humanity had found itself at the very heart of that danger. "Hold tight," Alexander shouted over the growing hum of the engines. "We're entering the forbidden zone. Everything we've ever known about space is about to change." The stars on the view screen twisted and distorted as the ship veered toward the storm of strange energy that had made this region of space off-limits for centuries. The forbidden zone was a place of violent anomalies, unpredictable shifts in space-time, and unknown entities that no one had ever survived encountering. Yet, despite the risk, Alexander pressed forward. The crew of the freighter had come this far, and they weren't going to turn back now. There was no room for fear, only survival. "We need to time this right," one of the crew members muttered nervously, watching the blinking readouts on the control panel. "The gravitational fluxes out there are unpredictable. If we enter at the wrong angle, we'll be torn apart." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "That's why we've been prepping this for months. We're not just escaping. We're going to use the storm to our advantage." The view screen flickered again, and the space around them shimmered with energy. The storm of particles and strange matter was closing in fast. It seemed to pulse, alive with an eerie glow, as if the zone itself was a sentient being, watching them as they approached. One of the crew members turned to Alexander, panic flashing in his eyes. "They're catching up. The warships are just behind us. We can't outrun them for much longer. Don't worry, Alexander said calmly, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. We don't need to outrun them. We just need to survive long enough to get to the core. Once we're inside, the warships won't dare follow. But if we make it inside, what then? The crew member asked. What's waiting for us in there? We don't know anything about this place. The tension in the ship was palpable, the fear of the unknown clawing at everyone's nerves. But Alexander's focus remained unwavering. Whatever's in there, we'll face it together. We've got one shot at this. The universe has never seen anything like humanity before. We'll make them see what we're capable of. As the ship neared the edge of the forbidden zone, the warships fired again, energy beams tearing through space, narrowly missing the freighter. The blasts rocked the ship, sending a shockwave of heat and pressure through its hull. Sparks flew from the control panels as systems began to falter under the strain. Engine power at 60%, the engineer called out. Shields are holding, but we can't take much more of this. Push it to the limit. Alexander barked. We're almost there. I can see the storm. Ahead of them, the forbidden zone loomed like a vast ocean of swirling chaos. The stars themselves seemed to bend and distort as they neared the event horizon of the storm. The freighter shuddered, its hull groaning as the gravity wells of the zone pulled at it from all sides. We're almost in, the pilot said, his hands flying over the controls as he fought to keep the ship on course. Just a few more seconds. The freighter plunged into the storm. The entire ship was jolted violently as the fabric of space-time warped around them. The crew members were thrown from their seats, crashing against the walls and consoles. The ship's hull screeched as if in agony, the strange energies of the zone tearing at its very structure. The view screen went black for a split second before flickering back to life, revealing a world unlike anything they had ever seen. The storm had opened up into a vast, shifting void of impossible shapes and twisted landscapes. There were no stars here, just vast, swirling clouds of energy, and the occasional flash of lightning that seemed to stretch across dimensions. The laws of physics themselves seemed to bend and twist in this place, and the crew couldn't help but feel that they were no longer just in space, but in some otherworldly realm. We're inside, Alexander said, his voice low. Stay focused. We need to make it to the core. That's our only chance. As they pushed deeper into the heart of the forbidden zone, strange things began to happen. The ship's instruments went haywire, giving readings that didn't make sense. The walls of the freighter vibrated with strange frequencies, and the crew could hear odd, unearthly sounds, like whispers in the distance, like the universe itself was speaking to them. Are we hearing things? One of the crew members asked, their voice shaking. Alexander gripped the armrests of his seat, determined to remain calm. It's the storm. It plays tricks on your mind. But we have to keep going. No matter what happens, we can't stop. Outside the freighter, the warships were still following, but the storm had swallowed them up. They were caught, trapped at the edges of the anomaly, unable to track the freighter as it disappeared deeper into the unknown. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Alexander felt a flicker of hope. They had made it inside. They were no longer running from the warships. Now they had to face whatever awaited them in the heart of the storm. Hold steady, Alexander ordered. We're not just surviving this. We're going to change everything. And with that, the crew of the freighter steered toward the unknown core, prepared to face whatever unimaginable challenges the forbidden zone would throw at them. The heart of chaos. The freighter plunged deeper into the storm, the crew's world shrinking to the glow of the flickering consoles and the dim hum of the ship's battered engines. Space outside was no longer recognizable, twisted into swirling colors and shapes that defied all known laws of physics. Time felt stretched and unstable, as though the very concept of reality was being tested. Gravity was no longer consistent. The crew struggled to keep their balance, their stomachs churning as the ship lurched unpredictably. Shields are fluctuating. The engineer shouted over the din, sweat running down his face. We can't keep this up much longer. How long until we reach the core? Alexander asked, his voice steady despite the rising panic in the crew's eyes. The pilot, gripping the control yoke with white knuckles, didn't answer immediately. He was too busy trying to steady the ship, his eyes flickering between the unstable readings and the madness unfolding outside. The view screen showed nothing but violent swirls of energy, as if they were drifting through an ocean of chaos. I'm not sure, the pilot admitted finally, voice trembling. We've never been this far inside before. The storm's messing with all our readings. We're flying blind here. A massive shudder ran through the ship, and a loud crack echoed from the hull. Sparks flew from a console in the control room, and the lights flickered as if they might go out at any moment. Everyone, hold on. Alexander barked, gripping his seat as the ship bucked again. We're almost there. His words were meant to comfort, but even he wasn't sure if it was true. There was no map for this place, no coordinates to follow. They were navigating a region of space that had been shrouded in mystery and terror for millennia. The Forbidden Zone wasn't just a location. It was a myth, a place where ships vanished without a trace, where travelers were never heard from again. But the crew had made it this far. Alexander's thoughts raced as they continued to descend deeper. He was reminded of the old legends, stories of ancient beings who could manipulate the fabric of space and time. Stories of civilizations lost to the universe's darkest corners. What were they about to uncover? What kind of danger awaited them? Are we close? A crew member gasped, clutching at the side of his seat. Stay with me, Alexander ordered. We're not giving up now. But even as he spoke, he could feel the pressure building in the pit of his stomach. Something was coming. Something beyond their comprehension. Then the ship's alarm blared. A harsh, mechanical voice filled the cockpit. Warning. Catastrophic energy buildup detected ahead. Evacuation recommended. Core breach imminent. The crew froze, their faces paling as they heard the words. Core breach. The engineer shouted, scrambling over to the diagnostics panel. That can't be right. We haven't even reached the core. But the ship's systems were unrelenting. The data was clear. Something inside the storm was building. Something powerful, and it was going to explode. Everyone brace yourselves, Alexander ordered, his voice now firm and resolute. We're going to push through it. We can't turn back now. The freighter lurched again, this time with such force that the entire crew was thrown from their seats. Their heads collided with the walls as the entire ship tilted violently. The glowing energy outside the viewscreen flashed brightly, and the once stable gravitational pull shifted once more, throwing the crew into disarray. Hang on, Alexander shouted, managing to strap himself into the captain's seat. We're almost there, just a little further. Then suddenly, the freighter broke free of the chaotic energy storm. The ship plummeted into a space so different from what they'd just been through that it was as if they had crossed into an entirely new dimension. The storm was behind them now, the energy of the zone dissipating into nothingness. Before them lay an unimaginable sight, a glowing, pulsating mass at the center of the Forbidden Zone, surrounded by swirling debris and ancient wreckage. At first, it looked like a massive black hole, but it didn't pull at their ship the way a true singularity would. Instead, it radiated energy, strange, otherworldly energy that resonated with the ship's hull. We've made it, the pilot whispered in awe, his voice barely audible over the ship's creaking. Before them lay the heart of the Forbidden Zone, the core. It was not a singular object, but a swirling mass of unstable energy that seemed to bend the fabric of space itself. It pulsed rhythmically, like a living creature, its energy flowing outward in ripples that distorted everything around it. That's the core, a crew member asked, her voice shaking. But it's alive. Alexander finished for her, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. This isn't just a cosmic phenomenon. This is something else. The energy surrounding the core was overwhelming. It hummed with a frequency that seemed to resonate deep in their bones. The crew watched in stunned silence, unsure whether they should approach it or flee. "This is it," Alexander said, his eyes narrowing with determination. "This is the power we've been looking for. This is the key to everything." The crew was silent, all of them aware of the gravity of the moment. They had crossed into a place no one had dared to enter before. They were on the verge of discovering something that could change everything, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. "What do we do now?" a crew member asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alexander sat back in his seat, staring out at the pulsing mass of energy. "We go inside," he said. "We're going to find out what this core really is, and we're going to harness its power into the heart of the core." The crew stared in disbelief at the energy core, its undulating glow radiating through the view screen. It pulsed rhythmically, like a giant, sentient heart, sending out waves of energy that caused the ship's hull to vibrate with an almost hypnotic rhythm. The core was alive in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. Its sheer presence filled the freighter, overwhelming their senses and making them feel as though they were on the edge of existence itself. "Captain," the engineer said cautiously, his voice strained as he monitored the ship's systems. "We're being pulled in. The energy from the core. It's not just affecting our shields. It's affecting the fabric of space itself. I can't explain it, but we're losing control of the ship." Alexander gripped the armrest of his seat, his knuckles white. "We can't turn back now," he said through gritted teeth. "This is what we came for. We've come too far to give up." The ship groaned under the strain as it was drawn closer to the core. The glowing pulses of energy from the mass intensified, surrounding them like a web of power. Outside the ship, the space around them twisted and warped. Stars blinked in and out of existence, and the fabric of reality itself seemed to bend in ways that defied all logic. "Hold on to something," the pilot shouted as he struggled to regain control of the ship. "We're being sucked into the core's influence. If we don't act fast, we'll be pulled in completely." The ship lurched forward with a violent jolt, and the crew was thrown from their seats. For a split second, everything was chaotic. The emergency alarms blared, lights flickered, and the view outside the ship became a blur of colors and distortions. The crew struggled to regain their footing as the freighter was dragged closer to the core. "Captain," the engineer cried out. "The core it's changing. I don't understand. It's growing stronger." The energy around them was becoming more concentrated, like a gravity well that pulled them closer with every second. The crew's hearts raced in their chests as they realized the truth. The core was not just a source of power. It was a living, breathing entity, one that seemed to have a will of its own, and it was not going to let them leave easily. "Get us out of here," Alexander barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to destroy us." But the pilot, his hands gripping the controls desperately, looked up at the view screen with wide, terrified eyes. I can't break free from its pull." The core pulsed again, brighter this time. A wave of energy swept over the ship, and the freighter groaned as it was dragged closer. The crew felt a sense of vertigo, as though they were no longer in space, but somewhere between worlds. "Captain, we have no choice," the pilot shouted, sweat dripping down his face. "We have to go into the heart of it. We need to stabilize ourselves inside the core's energy field. It's the only way to survive." The words hit Alexander like a blow to the chest. Inside the core, no one had ever attempted something so reckless before. It was madness. But the alternative was even worse, being consumed by the overwhelming force of the core, or worse, becoming trapped in this strange, shifting reality forever. "We're going in," Alexander said, his voice steady. "Prepare for the unknown." The pilot nodded, his face grim. "Brace yourselves, everyone. It's going to be a bumpy ride." The freighter plunged into the heart of the core's energy field. As they crossed the threshold, everything around them seemed to disintegrate. The ship's systems flickered and died, leaving them in an eerie silence, the only sound the ragged breathing of the crew. For a moment, it felt like they had entered another dimension, one that was pure energy and chaos. The space outside the view screen was an ever-shifting sea of light and dark, streaks of color flowing in strange patterns that didn't make sense. It was as if the laws of physics had been torn apart and reassembled in a completely alien way. The crew was silent as they watched in awe and terror. The ship was no longer functioning in the way it once had. The concept of forward and backward had lost all meaning. The core had completely redefined their perception of reality. Is this the end? A crew member whispered, her voice trembling. No, Alexander said firmly, standing up from his seat. This is the beginning. His voice rang out with a confidence he didn't entirely feel, but he couldn't show weakness now. They had crossed the point of no return. There was no turning back. The core was their only chance at survival, and possibly the key to understanding the mysterious forces at play in the universe. The crew turned their eyes to the view screen, now a glowing mass of chaotic energy, the core at the center of it all. Their ship, the vessel that had carried them through countless dangers, now seemed insignificant in comparison to the power that surrounded them. Whatever happens next, Alexander said, we're in this together. The crew nodded in agreement, their faces resolute. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, a voice echoed through the ship's speakers, low, ancient, and undeniably powerful. You have entered the heart of the universe's greatest mystery. Welcome, travelers. The truth unveiled. The voice that had echoed through the ship's speakers was like nothing they had ever heard before. It wasn't a machine's voice, nor was it a familiar tone from any known species. It was deep, ancient, and reverberated through the ship's hull like a force of nature. The crew exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of whether they had heard it with their ears or felt it in their very minds. The ship floated in a space that no longer resembled the universe they knew. The energy from the core wrapped around them like an ocean of light, pulsing in rhythmic waves, bending the very fabric of space. Stars blinked in and out of existence. The laws of physics were being rewritten with each passing second, and they were no longer sure of their place in this new reality. Who are you? Alexander asked, his voice steady but betraying a hint of uncertainty. He looked out into the vast sea of light that surrounded them, as if expecting an answer to materialize before him. For a moment, there was silence, an oppressive stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. The crew held their breath, waiting. Then the voice spoke again, this time clearer, as if the very energy of the core was being channeled directly into their minds. We are the Watchers, it said. We have existed since before the stars were born, observing, guiding, and protecting the universe. The words hit them like a wave of cold air. The Watchers. Who could these beings be? And why were they speaking to them now? Why have you brought us here? Alexander asked, trying to control the growing sense of dread in his chest. He was a leader, but even the strongest of leaders have their limits, especially when faced with something beyond their understanding. The universe is dying. The voice responded, its tone somber. The balance has been broken, and the threads of fate are unraveling. You, humans, have unknowingly triggered the events that will decide the fate of all life. The core is the key to your salvation, or your destruction. A ripple of shock passed through the crew. They had always known that their kind was capable of great things, but to hear that they had unknowingly set the course for the entire universe's survival was overwhelming. What are we supposed to do? One of the crew members asked, her voice trembling. We're just a small ship. How could we possibly make a difference? You are not alone, the voice replied. The others will come, but you must act quickly. The core is collapsing under the weight of its own power. You must stabilize it before it consumes everything. Time is running out. Alexander's mind raced as he processed the gravity of the situation. They had come to find answers, but instead, they had found themselves in the middle of a cosmic crisis, with the fate of the entire universe resting on their shoulders. They were just a small crew on a simple freighter, but now they were the only ones who could stop the end of everything. The crew gathered around the control panel, their eyes fixed on the glowing core ahead of them. It pulsed with such intensity that they could feel the energy coursing through their bodies, vibrating their very souls. The ship trembled under the weight of the core's power, but they had no choice. They had to act, and they had to act fast. "We don't have much time," Alexander said, his voice firm. "We need to find a way to stabilize the core and prevent it from collapsing. We have to trust that we can do this." But as the crew prepared to make their move, the core began to shift. The energy waves that had once been rhythmic and predictable now grew erratic and unstable. The ship lurched violently, throwing the crew off balance. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered in and out. The core was fighting back, resisting their attempts to intervene. "It's trying to protect itself," the engineer shouted over the noise. "It's not just a power source. It's a living entity, and it's fighting us. We can't let it win," Alexander said, gritting his teeth. "We have to stabilize it. Now." With every ounce of strength, the crew worked together to adjust the ship's systems, channeling every last drop of their ship's power into the core. They could feel the tension in the air, the growing pressure as the core continued to pulse in unpredictable patterns. Suddenly, there was a sharp jolt as the core emitted a burst of energy so intense that it knocked the crew to the ground. The entire ship shook violently, and for a moment, it felt as if everything was going to collapse around them. The lights went out, and the crew was plunged into darkness. And then, silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. The crew was motionless, their hearts pounding in their chests, unsure if they had succeeded or if they had doomed themselves. But then, slowly, the lights came back on, flickering to life one by one. The hum of the ship's systems returned. The core, once a chaotic force of destruction, was now stable. The energy around them had calmed, the waves of power returning to a steady rhythm. "We did it," the engineer said in disbelief. "The core is stabilized." The crew let out a collective sigh of relief, but Alexander knew that this was just the beginning. The universe had been saved for now. But what would happen next? What new challenges would arise? And what did it mean for humanity's place in the grand scheme of things? "We have time to prepare," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "But we can't stop here. We need to find out what's really at stake and who the Watchers really are." As the crew looked out into the unknown, they knew one thing for certain. Humanity had just become part of something much bigger than they had ever imagined.